Last December, I got a notice from a friend of mine by the name of Wynn Collier. Wynn is a professor at the Reformed Seminary in Holland, Michigan, where half the population is blonde because they're all Dutch descendants. It's quite amazing. And he invited me to be a part of a pastor's retreat that took place this past week. And so I didn't know that I would know anybody there except for Wynn. As it turned out, I actually knew a number of people. But two things struck me. One was, first of all, from Jordan, as well as other people I knew who had been there, a place called Laity Lodge, which is way south, like about a 5-hour drive through all these tiny little towns on back roads that eventually get you to Leakey, Texas. It's not a place you'd necessarily want to be, unless you had a ranch or unless you knew about Laity Lodge. It's right on the river. It's beautiful. And they said, and the food is terrific. So I drove down there, and somebody, a parishioner here actually, Teresa, said, you know, it's wildflower season. You'll see bluebonnets. So I was up for that. I didn't see a one. On the way down, it was too early. But what happened to me down there was I was invited into a space with about 20 other people, men and women, from a whole variety of denominational backgrounds. And what the speaker did at the very beginning was that he said, I don't know what it's like when you go to clergy conferences, but what actually happens in most places is that everybody tries to one-up each other. They brag. What's going on in their church, the latest, greatest, whatever God is doing, all that kind of language. And it's all meant to make them feel better about themselves. And we all laughed because we knew that was true. All of us had experienced that. And then he said, I want you to know that is wicked. And we will not do that here. We're here not to show off our laurels. We're here just to get to know each other and see what God will do in the conversations and in the talks and in the worship. And all of us exhaled. In other words, what he was saying is, this is a place where you can be real with one another. You don't have to put your best foot forward and pretend. And that's exactly what happened in a way that I have to tell you was life-changing for me. And driving back up, there were the bluebonnets. I say all of that because God knew inside of me, which is why the invitation came, not because my friend Wynn wanted me to come. He did, but that wasn't the real story. The real story was that God was organizing a 3-day break for me to go down there, exhaled with a bunch of people I knew and didn't know, as it turned out, for God to do some work in my heart that needed to be done. And there was the space for that to happen. I say that really intentionally because I don't know about how your life works, but if you're one of those people who is a kind of a go-getter and likes to get things done and always has a to-do list and all of that, you get a lot accomplished. People notice. But what you lose in the process is the capacity to make room for what's going on inside. You're too distracted. You've always gotten the next thing that you've got to prepare for or attend to. Reflection is far from you, at least at any level of depth. And what this sermon is in fact inviting you to do is to create the space. You see, the lessons this morning are promise, that's Isaiah, and then partial fulfillment plus longing in the psalm, in the epistle, and in the gospel reading. And the price people had to pay to make room. The promise, which has yet to be fully realized, by the way. I mean, when did Isaiah write this versus now? We're talking about thousands of years. But the promise is, he talks about a new thing that God is doing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? In other words, come on, people of God. You're the ones who are supposed to see into what God is doing. Do you actually see this happening around you? The wild animals will honor me, the jackal and the ostrich, for I will give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people, the people who I formed for myself, that they might declare my praise. Now, in the midst of the hyperbole of the language and the beauty of the poetic references, what God is promising Isaiah, a people presently in the desert of exile, by the way. They have been taken captive. They are not their own. They are hostages in their own land, or they have been taken off to Babylon. Is that in the midst of the desert that you are living in right now, what I am going to do is begin to put provision in the very places where you are the most hungry and thirsty, in a way that will so be a blessing to you that it will cause my people to declare my praise. That's the promise. That's what he says he's going to do. We go right into the psalm, and the writer of the psalm says some of the very same things. He talks about there has been restoration, times of restoration, and when that happened, our mouth was filled with laughter, our tongues with shouts of joy. But what are our present circumstances? Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses of the Negev. And they're counting into the future the promise that says those who sowed with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, will come again. In other words, when the harvest happens, will come again with joy, shouldering their sheaves. In other words, there's a longing. I know it isn't always going to be like this, oh God. We're praying for you to make that future present as far as is possible. And more often than not, what that means is as far as is possible for us to have the capacity to receive. It's not that God is being stingy, but there is a work that God needs to do in us to make room in us, to prepare for us the very blessing that he desires to pour out. In other words, if I'm just going this way and I'm driven, and yet the blessing is 20 yards that way, there will be a time as I'm praying that prayer, if I don't recognize the foolishness of my direction, there'll be a time where God will literally step into the midst of it and go, no, I want to answer your prayers, but they're not that way. This is the way to the blessing, not the way in which you are going. And that happens to more people than they are willing to admit. That God gets at even the best of their values to say the way you are organizing your life right now will only bring you desert. It will only offer you the dust of the wilderness. And yet your heart is crying out for me, for blessing and for joy and for the capacity to have all that's inside of you restored. But you're continuing to go the very way that is killing you. I want to take you in a way that will actually show you what joy looks like, so you know how to live your life in a very different way. Beloved, the question is, if God alone is the one who can bring into order the unruly wills and affections of sinners, the collect for this morning that Jordan quoted before we walked in, it's true. Many times the nature of our unruly will is like corralling a steer. It's not necessarily gentle. It is abrupt often, where God has to break in and do things that we may not even naturally like, to call us into a place where we begin to rely on him in a new and different way. And what God is doing in the midst of all of that is opening the doors inside of our hearts through the loss of what we knew to make room for the blessing that God desires to impart. And what is the blessing? The blessing is a new heart. It's not more money. It's a new heart, so that you have the capacity to be able to take what the Lord gives you and use it in a way that both brings him delight and it's a joy to you. It's a joy to you. That's Mary in the gospel reading. Mary of Bethany. I mean, I don't know about you, when I finally read that Bible passage, trying to think about this week, I kept bumping into all the other things I'd heard about it, and it wasn't getting at what was happening inside of my heart. And I was trying to figure out what that was. And finally, the question bubbled up. What did Mary see about Jesus that I don't see? What was it about her complete and utter willingness and devotion to, in essence, give away her life savings? Because that's what she did. Right there. Just even in the midst of the derision of one of the disciples. A lot of good money could have been done. And, Jesus would have had none of it. Because he saw what she was doing. She was literally saying, this is all of who I am. I'm not holding anything back at all. I lay that and pour it out at your feet. It's all I can do because of who you are. Maybe it would be different for us if we were at that dinner party and there was a man that God had raised from the dead sitting there and eating chicken beside us. Maybe that might have changed how we think about who Jesus is, but something had gotten Mary's attention. She was ready to be a part of what Jesus was doing, no matter what it was, no matter what it cost her. And that, sisters and brothers, is what it looks like when God gets a hold of the unruly will and affection of sinners. What he does is that he turns those men and women into men who are hopelessly devoted. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else if their life depended on it. Know that if they abandon Jesus, they literally lose everything. And they're not going to let that happen no matter what. And because that's so, they'll make whatever room is necessary in their life to stay deeply connected experientially to the objective work that God has done within us in claiming us as his sons and daughters, so that they know how to delight in him. They know what joy is. Joy is nothing more than the experiential overflow of the presence of God that is already inside of you by grace. That's what joy is. Or to use the language of the Bible, it's the fruit of the Spirit. But to walk in that kind of walk means we have to be willing to allow God to do this. Could be a small thing. Could be a really big thing. But if all you want from God is someone to basically help you get through the next day, God will do that. He's so generous and so very, very kind. But what he's actually trying to do is something bigger. He, in a way that isn't necessarily always true for us, he is paying attention to our longings. And because the Spirit of God is inside of us, there is a longing inside of us as his people for God to open new doors within, for us to know more about him. I want to know you, Paul says in Philippians, and it is the most intimate of analogies, so that I know the power of your resurrection. He knew, see. And that same longing is a part of what God places inside of us, because it is God's longing for us as his children that we know that kind of love and power in our lives. Lent is about getting in touch with your longings. I could walk up, I could go back and sit down right now. Beloved, if you want to float through and breeze through until Easter, you are welcome to do that. Nobody's going to force you to do anything. But if you're willing to say, okay, whatever it takes, God, I don't know what that even looks like. I want to be able to step in ways that I haven't in the past. My life inside, my spiritual life is paltry in comparison to what Mary at Bethany saw in you. I don't see it, and I need you to show me who you really are. Work in me what I cannot make happen for myself. You alone can bring into order the unruly affections of sinners. Restore our fortunes, O Lord. May we be people who do more than just weep, but actually come back shouldering the sheaves with joy, because we know in a whole new way the fruit and the power of God operating in our lives. And we know in the deepest parts of who we are that we are profoundly and deeply treasured and loved. And that God can and will do in and through us more than we could ever ask or imagine. Make room, beloved, for the longings that God has put inside of you. Ask him, beg him to do that work. So that on Easter Sunday, if you dare, you'll sing louder. You'll jump a little higher. And yeah, you can do that, by the way. And there'll be more inside of you than you could have ever imagined, because you are able to say, it's not just that Jesus is risen, which is true, but he's risen in here. Amen.